Hi, everybody. Welcome to RoboWeekly, episode 12. Hey, Dan, how you doing?
Pretty good. This is 12?
Survived the week? This is 12. What do you got for me for 12?
Good. Well, it's a bit of a rabbit hole, but Pythagoras invented the scales based on the harmonic series, like 4/3, 5/5/4, 6/5. These are natural musical intervals. 2/1 is an octave, 3/2 is a fifth, 4/3. But here's the problem. They're slightly off from each other in different keys. And so for years, people played music, and if you played it in C major, it sounded okay. If you switched to F major or E flat, it sounded all wrong. Then they came up with this idea of just intonation, which is moving every one of the 12 notes to a little bit to the left, sharp or flat, until they're all equally sharp or flat from each other. This was developed in the 1600s. This is why Bach put out the well-tempered clavier in 12 major and 12 minor keys. He was showing off the fact that he could tune his harpsichord and his organ. They didn't have pianos at that time. In such a way, he could tune them in such a way that he could play in any key and it wouldn't be like all famungled and terrible sounding. It's called just intonation. And a friend of my son, a friend of my son who's a genius, had never heard of it. And I said, how do you think just intonation would work? And he goes, what do you mean? I mean, so that every key would sound the same. He thinks for 10 seconds and he goes, 12th roots of 2. And that's the truth. And I'll leave you with this. Yeah. The reason it doesn't work perfectly and you have to make them a little sharper or flatter is because, 2 to the 7th is 128, but 5 to the 3rd is 125. That's the difference. I leave it to you.
Okay. You just lost me at the end. You just lost me in there, but all I've got for you is I play the didgeridoo, which only plays one note, which is C sharp. No, it's a function of the length.
If you do 4/3 cubed, we're not going to have time for this. Just look it up. Wikipedia. Ask Claude about it.
My simple one for 12. Oh, well, my simple one for 12. The only thing I could come up with was the letter B in hexadecimal.
It's not. B is 11.
So this is episode. No, it's not. A is 11. No.
You're wrong. A is 10 because it goes 0 to 9.
You're right. Welcome to episode C for Charlie. Okay, let's hit it. What do we got for number 1?
Yarbo.
Okay, this is Yarbo. Yarbo just raised a bunch of money, and they are selling outdoor yard equipment. They originally, they've been around for a long time. They originally attacked a very intractable problem at that time, which was snow removal. And they since moved into this. They want to do everything in the yard. You no longer
Roomba for the yard. Roomba for outside.
Yeah, this is Roomba for the yard. Yeah, but they have edging things, and they have. But one reason why this was interesting was that they crowdfunded a bunch of money to get going, and are now selling. I think they said they sold 700 units when they first launched after crowdfunding, just for the equity. So that's an interesting model. That's the way they've done it. And this is actually the closest announcement this week we have to a Cobot, to something that exists in the house. And this is moving on from Roomba essentially. So what we have here is the other thing that's interesting about this one is it says that it will enable a mode where it will follow you, and it can then carry up to 500 pounds of shit that you put in it. Wow. So you can start dumping.
Do they do lawnmowers?
Yeah, one of them's a lawnmower. I'm not sure which one, but there's a lawnmower, an edger, and one that just follows you around like carrying stuff.
Yeah, I find these boring, but it's great that they're pushing into the market and raising expectations. But
I figured I'd bring it up because quite frankly, this week there wasn't a lot in our segment this week, but this was pretty much one of the only ones in the Cobot segment, and it was a pretty big announcement. There's a lot of announcements coming up because of the show in Boston, the expo.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, so that's Yarbo. Let's move on to Zaba. So it's like this picture here is not really that relevant. It's actually it's a 3D printer. But let me tell you about Zaba, because Zaba is a software company, which is what we like to talk about. I'm going to read this to you. Zaba's just raised $6 million to build, quote, synthetic brains. And this is the interesting statistic that I wanted to build.
Sorry, was that 6 million million M or billion B?
No, they've raised 6 million to build synthetic brains. Okay. But here's the interesting statistic: is they are claiming, which I believe, is that developing robots themselves, in other words, not building robots, deploying robots, which is, making them able to do a certain task. Deploying robots costs 80% of the $7 billion spent on robots. So in other words, 80% of that 7 billion is spent on programming the robot to do a specific task.
Right.
What Zaba is saying is that they have built these synthetic brains that can speed it up by 10x using AI, whatever that means. I mean, we can take a look and see a little bit more. But in fact, do I have Zaba here? And I can just give me 1 second. Yes, I do. So Zaba is saying the industrial automation is highly inefficient and it relies on outdated controllers. Traditional robotic systems require extensive programming, which is why they quoted that price. And this is what it says it can do. Founded in 2020, Zaba says its generative industrial AI equips machines with cognitive intelligence, allowing them to autonomously adapt, optimize, and execute tasks with precision. Its flagship X-Cognition platform is designed to accelerate deployment of industrial automation and collaborative robots. So it's essentially using AI, and AI obviously is the magic word, to take away the traditional ways of training controllers. And it uses all kinds of words like AI code generation and physics-informed machine learning, just the general stuff. But, they just raised $8 million, so good for them. And I hope
I think it was 6. But,
sorry, $6 million.
Yeah, I mean,
it is 6. So
I'm a little suspicious of any, something based on 2020 AI technology, right? I mean, are they doing a pivot? Or what were they offering in 2021?
Yeah, so I don't know. We'll find out at the show next week. But I mean, I think that is the main problem for most of these companies who've been around for a while, is that they've invested, huge amounts of money in, what may be outdated in 10 seconds. And I would be slightly nervous about it, but I guess they're trying to integrate AI into whatever they can as soon as possible. Okay, let's move on.
Business plan and get more investment.
Yeah, it's like the old days, just stick a .com on the end. What do we have next here?
Looks like solar.
Yeah. So the reason this is interesting, this is a company called Cosmotic Robots. And they just got a bunch of funding to actually install solar panels in this particular case. But the reason it's interesting is because they're doing this, they just raised $4 million, by the way. And the reason it's interesting is because they're doing this because there's a lack of workers to do this job. And especially now with, potentially lack of people here to do jobs. And in this particular case, it's a job that nobody wants to do because it's out in, the scorching desert. This was interesting to me because it really is a robot that is driven by labor shortages.
Yeah. And so let me talk about this for a sec, because I had a good friend who was pretty big in the solar space, and this must be 10 years ago now. He was talking to me about robots to clean. One of the big problems is they get dirty. They need to be cleaned all the time. Is that what these guys are saying they're going to do? Or they're inspecting and making sure that nothing got damaged?
This is actually installing. You can see there's an array.
Oh, they're actually installing. Okay.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. So it's going along and putting the panels in that array.
Right. Well, that's pretty impressive.
I just thought it was interesting. Yeah, I just thought it was interesting, because a lot of people are complaining that robots and AI are going to take their jobs, which they may do. But I just wanted to remind everybody there are a bunch of jobs that nobody wants to do. Nobody should do. Nobody should be crawling around in radioactive environments. And quite frankly, nobody should be in 120-degree deserts trying to make a living, quite frankly.
Except that dirty jobs guy. What's his name?
Yeah. Okay, what do we got next here? Ah, yes.
Right.
So in China, they, for the first time, entered humanoids in a half marathon. 21 humanoids on one side and a bunch of actual people on the other side. As you can see, most of them did not complete it. But in order for a robot to be qualified as finishing, it has to have done, they're allowed to change batteries. It had to do it within 3 hours, and 2 of them managed it. So, this is China. We like to, right here, we always talk about Boston Dynamics and everything like that. But this to me is getting there, a half marathon. I like to give things a round of applause as much as I like to, give people the big raspberry. So this is really around. There he goes. Look at that half marathon.
Yeah, they've come a long way with walking and running in the last year.
Yeah.
As you know, I worked on that years ago.
Yeah, he's got no hands there, of course, but he doesn't need it for running. Any comments on the speed of development in countries like China? Are they looking at it in a different way than we are? I know that, from a Western point of view, we kind of like to think, we make the movies and that we create the culture. But I'm not so sure that's true. In fact, I know it's not true. So, I mean, how do you feel about, China's development of robots, the fact they're bypassing us, doing it in different ways? We haven't been there yet, but I think we should go there and see what's going on.
They certainly have talent, and they certainly have a lot of chutzpah and motivation. I don't see this as sort of a world domination, winner take all sort of thing. I think there's room for, more than one country to develop this technology. They've clearly put a lot of effort into it, and we suffer or are privileged to have a more capitalist sort of bottom up approach to what we work on. We're right now the present administration is slashing R&D funding, so there's that. I'm not sure that's a great idea right now, but yeah, I mean, you got to give them credit when they're coming out with stuff like this, stuff that works.
I like to see stuff. Okay, let's go on to the last one for today. Now, this is Robot See, Robot Do.
Okay.
So this is Cornell University, who've come out with a robotic framework, which is what we like. We like software. So this is a robotic framework, which they call RIME, Retrieval for Hybrid Imitation under Mismatched Execution. What they claim it can do, they call it Robot See, Robot Do. They claim that the robot can do one-shot imitation. In other words, It can see a video of it doing something once and then do it on its own. Again, this is coming out of Cornell. Their basic philosophy was, can we find a principal way to deal with this mismatch between how humans and robots do tasks? RIME is the team's answer, scalable approach that makes robots less finicky and more adaptive. So it goes, there's a little bit more about actually how it's doing it, but it's essentially, they're saying this work is a departure from how robots are programmed today. The status quo of programming of robots is thousands of hours of teleoperation, which we know, to teach the robots how to do tasks, we know. That's just impossible. With RIME, we're moving away from that and learning to train robots in a more scalable way. So again, without having the total details, I mean, I know you personally know a lot about vision. Is this interesting to you that they're managing to do one shot from one vision?
Well, I'd have to read the paper and look at their GitHub and their YouTubes and stuff. But my hunch is this is probably very similar to OpenVLA, Pi0 from Physical Intelligence, what's called Groot from NVIDIA, is doing this, Le Robot. I mean, these, their marketing stuff is like, nobody's done this before. They probably wrote that, 18 months ago. Well, it ain't true now. I doubt very much that what they're doing is orders of magnitude smarter than some of these other companies that are getting funding for basically the same claims. And let me, because I've been looking very deeply into Physical Intelligence's Pi0 and the Hugging Face's Le Robot. And what they're doing is they're not doing training on tens of thousands of examples. They do that, that creates a foundation model. And then what they do is about 50 or 60 or at most 100 examples fine-tuned to the actual robot and actual task that you're doing. So it's
so
not
that's the reinforcement learning with human feedback we often hear a lot about.
Exactly. I think loosely you could say it's a version of that. It's fine tuning on the end. It's like the difference between GPT-3 and GPT 3.5 was that they put a chat bot around it, and sort of did prompt engineering and stuff, and that's what they're doing with the VLAs, and that's kind of I'm guessing what these guys are doing.
So what I think you're saying is that this one-shot learning is not really one-shot learning; it's more one-shot refinement.
Yeah, I mean, it gets tricky. I doubt it's one shot through video. I mean, one example doesn't give you enough variance. I'd have to read the paper. Basically they're claiming one-shot learning. I bet it's actual coordinates, like it's somebody doing a teleoperation rig, and so it's not just video; it's actual 3D coordinate space. Because that, if you could train robots on video, you would just scrape all of YouTube and be done, right?
Right.
It's clear that doesn't quite work. I know people have tried it. People were talking about it a year ago. You don't hear them talking about it now. They talk about getting enough data, either synthetic data through simulation, or just data through like tons of, grad students are cheap, and their time is they can put them to task. And, like some of these data sets have like 1 million operations, or hundreds of thousands of examples, which is nothing compared to the internet, which the LLMs had.
So this brings me to my question topic for today, which sort of relates to a few of the things we're seeing here, and it relates to something we already talked about, which is the difference between AI startups that have started up in the last 2 years. Sorry, robotic startups that have started up in the last 2 years, and legacy robotic companies that are now, I wouldn't say it's trying to pivot, but are now trying to modify their existing healthy business and integrate current tools. One has an established business, an established revenue, and an established R&D department, yet they're entrenched in this old model of controllers, and now we have this new coterie, a few of which I've mentioned, like Zaba, which are software companies, and they're raising $7 million and $6 million. And they're the new ones that aren't hampered by any of this legacy stuff. If you were starting a company now, which I believe you might be,
if I would be so lucky.
Which place do you think you would rather be? Would you rather be starting from scratch, or would you rather have an existing hardware platform behind you to
well, it depends. I mean, I think there's going to be some fundamental technology startups, or maybe even just open source type projects that nobody makes a ton of money on, and then there's going to be sort of like the SaaS market, like the fine tuning it for a specific niche market, right? Like automotive, warehousing, whatever it is. I think those kind of companies, they definitely would suffer if they had to do it from the ground up. And the ones that did it 10 years ago did, iRobot and stuff like that, and Boston Dynamics, that were around sort of before there was a huge business around it. Well, I mean, iRobot did build a business around it, but and what they were trying to do is simpler than what they're doing now. So yeah, no, I would prefer to have that grunt work, be done by a bunch of research groups at different colleges, putting stuff out on an Apache license, and I can just use it the way I use Linux, right? The way I use Ubuntu and MongoDB and the tools that I use that are community driven.
Well, let me follow up that question. With regards to all these software companies, let's call them the second generation of robotics companies. Let's define as companies that were formed after 2023. Do we think that they all seem to be describing the same thing, sort of? I'm trying.
Because they're basing it on the same research.
Yeah, I mean, it's all VLA, which is the current state of the art. But none of them are sort of saying that. Some of them are, but everyone's sort of saying the same thing. They're all saying, "Oh, it used to be the old stupid way, and now we're going to do it the smart way with Gen AI." And no one's really saying anything else, but they're all raising tons of cash. It's a little bit it's a little bit weird, .com-ish. I'm not quite sure what to make of it.
A little bit of madness for crowds.
I don't know. I mean, I'm sure these investment companies have done their due diligence. I would assume. Maybe I shouldn't assume.
No, they probably have.
I just wanted to point out that I personally, I mean, maybe it's easier for you, but I personally am sort of feeling like that when I'm looking at these software companies, I'm seeing the same thing over and over again, and just seeing the same kind of thing being described in a bunch of different ways.
Yeah, I mean, I think that often means that you're at the cusp of something important, and a lot of great minds think alike, or even mediocre minds think alike sometimes, and so people are jumping on this bandwagon. But I think there is a fundamental technical difference between doing robotics in the year 2025 and say 2020, which is the existence of large models and deep learning and backpropagation and transformers and natural language interfaces that seem very human-like. Really just changes the landscape, so people are jumping on it, right? And physical intelligence comes from one professor from Berkeley and another professor from Stanford and their students, right? And they raised $400 million or something. So I mean, I'm sure someone did some due diligence before they wrote that check. I hope.
Right. Well, I think
if I was a partner, I would. Yeah.
The weird thing to me is, they may have done the due diligence, but my guess is that in 12 months' time, when we're sitting here doing this show, things are going to be, maybe not 180 degrees, but certainly 90 degrees from where they are now. We can predict the unpredictability of what's about to happen. That's pretty much it. So you've got all these companies raising all this money. Maybe it's just because they're teams who are up to speed and they can pivot if they need to.
Yeah, I mean, I think you'll see some of them doing okay. I think some of them are overcapitalized. I think it's going to be harder to get this stuff to work in the real world than anybody wants to admit. I think there's a good 3, 4, 5, 7 year timeline over which this is going to slowly get better. I mean, you can look at that with driving cars. You can look at that with like playing chess, and games and stuff like that. They often took longer than people predicted, but once they started taking off. So the question is, where are you in the hockey stick?
But with all those things, there was an inflection point where things sort of changed.
Yeah, I think we're getting close to it, but I don't think we're quite at it yet.
Yeah. Okay.
That's my hunch.
Well, I just wanted to make the point that I'm seeing a lot of stuff that sounds like the same story, but your answer is that's because everyone's on the right track, and that's a good thing. So
everyone's more or less on the same track.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I wish I had more Cobot news for us this week, but unfortunately we don't. But we have the big show in Boston coming up. Are you planning on going to Boston? Do you know? I will be there.
Probably not. I know you're going to be there. I'll decide this week.
Okay. Well, if you don't come, I'll probably go with one or another of our cohorts, and we'll be taking a camera and filming stuff and interviewing some people, and maybe we'll even bring you on live to ask a couple of questions.
Cool.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. Peace out.